Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsutsina, my pronunciations are not that accurate, First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, which includes the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nations of Alberta Region 3. First, I would also like to, for those of you who are joining this for the first time, wanted to let you know that what is Lunch and Learn series is all about. So it is a public presentation series that aims to bridge the graduate college with the Calgary community. Our series has been ongoing since April, and we are continuing the series into the fall. During each Lunch and Learn presentation, graduate scholars present their diverse research for the public. And it's, as I mentioned, it's held once a month. Today we have two presenters, Ashker and Harrison. Without further ado, today we'll start the presentations. And let me just introduce both the speakers first. So Ashker is second-year PhD student in the Department of Mechanical and Manufacturing Engineering. He's working with Dr. David Wood and Dr. Robert Martinuzzi. His core research background is in fluid dynamics and turbulence modeling. He also has industry experience and currently associated with Insight Engineering Services Limited. His presentation today will be on turbulence modeling and urban wind flow analysis. Thereafter, Harrison Campbell will present his work on imagining literacy, finding what is real by making believe. Harrison is a PhD student at the Workland School of Education here at the University of Calgary. His area of scholarship explores the use of theatrical phenomenology in understanding secondary student experiences of literacy. Harrison has experience as a language, arts, and drama teacher across both elementary and secondary schools. He's also currently a board of director member for the Making Treaty 7 Cultural Society. So, okay, Ashker, the floor is all yours. Please take it away.
Thanks a lot, Sumit. Hello, everybody.
Ashker, sorry, you're in the presenter mode.
Oh, sorry.
No worries.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah. It's still in the presenter mode. Maybe you can just make it full screen and then just make sure that you in Zoom. Yes, now it works. Yeah.
Sorry about that one. Okay, thanks a lot, Sumit, for the introduction. Hello, everybody. My name is Ashker. Today I'm going to talk about turbulence modeling for urban wind flow analysis. And thanks a lot, everybody, for joining us today for this session. So what I'm going to do is I have divided my presentation in 3 separate segments. First of all, we'll try to learn what is turbulent flow actually and how you can resolve it. Then we'll try to identify why it's very important to get the turbulence modeling accurate in urban wind flow analysis. And then I'll go through my research project with some preliminary analysis and the results. So what is turbulence, or what is turbulent flow actually? I guess once in a while, everybody have noticed a turbulent flow, whether you were in a plane or you have noticed a whirl of wind around yourself. From the fluid dynamics point of view, we have divided the flow into two different regimes, the laminar flow and the turbulent flow. Figure 1, you can clearly see that the laminar flow is very streamlined, very smooth, while the turbulence flow or the turbulence regime is very chaotic. Although very chaotic, the turbulent flow has some distinctive characteristics. It is stationary, unsteady, and a stochastic process. That means the statistical moment for this process is independent of time. But the variables inside the turbulent flow, such as pressure, velocity, this would be always a function of a time, which means it's unsteady. Turbulent flow is always enhanced mixing through the fluctuations of velocity. It's always diffusive and three-dimensional. That means it always distribute the energy in a on 3 dimensions. The most important characteristics of a turbulent flow is the energy cascade process. So what happens in a turbulent flow is energy comes from the mean or base flow. It goes through a largest flow structure, and from there it transfer energy from largest flow structure to small flow structure throughout the dissipative range. And that's what we call the energy cascading process. And as always, turbulence is very dissipative. So at the end of the energy cascading process, the energy would dissipate in another form, more or less in a heat form actually. Turbulent flow or turbulence is always present in the nature. You could notice it from the smoke billows in the atmosphere from the mixing in your coffee. So the turbulence or is actually is not a material property, so it's a flow property. So you can define turbulence through the Navier-Stokes equation, which is actually a conservation of momentum for fluid flow. So one might think, okay, if I can solve this Navier-Stokes equation analytically, then that's it. We can resolve turbulent very accurately, like 100%. But the issue with that approach is that the Navier-Stokes equation is yet to be solved analytically or mathematically. Actually, the Clay Mathematics Institute defined this Navier-Stokes equation as one of their millennium problems. So that means if we could solve it analytically, you could get 1 million US dollars. So the workaround to this problem is we use the Reynolds decomposition method. What we do is in this method is we took a variable for turbulent flow, say velocity. We divided into mean and the fluctuating part, and use this decomposition method. We convert that Navier-Stokes equation into Reynolds averaged Navier-Stokes equation, which is called the Rance equation. And we use this Rance equation to model the turbulent flow. So what are the methods that one can use to resolve the turbulence or a turbulent flow? First of all, there is always experimental method. That means you have to measure all these specific parameters at a specific time for a certain period of time, because we have already established that the variables for turbulent flow is unsteady. The problem with that method is sometimes it can be very cumbersome, and for a large project, it can be very expensive. And sometimes it can be just physically impossible. Like you cannot measure some certain variables at a certain time. With the analytical method, we have already established that the it's impossible yet to solve the Navier-Stokes equation analytically. So we'll not go through that way. The other method we use is the computational fluid dynamics modeling, which we call is a CFD. So this is a numerical approach, and within this CFD approaches, there are three main categories that we follow. The first one is the direct numerical simulation, or we call DNS. So what DNS does is it solves the Navier-Stokes equation numerically. So it solves the actual equation, exact equation numerically, and we get 100% accurate result. The next method is the large eddy simulation. So in large eddy simulation or LES, what we do is we solve for the larger scale eddies and we model the small scale eddies. In figure 2, you could see that the turbulence eddies in a plane mixing layer, where you can see the circled one. This is our large scale eddies. So in LES, we solve for these eddies, but we model the small vertical structure within that one. The other method is the RANS-based turbulence closure. So previously mentioned RANS-based equation, we just take that equation and we model all the eddies from large to small scale eddies. We model all of them. In terms of accuracy, from the description, you could just identify that the DNS is the most accurate method, but at the same time, if you talk about the computational cost, so DNS would be most expensive, and the RANs, because we are resolving or we are modeling all these structures, so the RANs would be least expensive in terms of computational cost. So then I'll go through my second topic is like what is urban wind flow and why it's very important to get the turbulence modeling accurate for urban wind flow analysis. So one of the major problem in urban wind flow analysis is that the flow itself is turbulent, and with the complex design of man-built environment with all the structures, what it does in an urban area is it creates all these stops for flow, which creates a zone of velocity acceleration and the velocity fluctuation. Figure 3 can give you a simple idea how complex the wind flow can be in an urban area. Figure 4 is just showing us a simple schematic diagram of our flow domain around a isolated building. I put up this figure to show you what's our zone of interest and the variables that we're interested in. So from our perspective, for the urban wind flow analysis, we are mainly interested in the stagnation region or the upstream of the building and the wake region and the downstream of the building. We also want to get the correct value of the recirculation length, which is defined here. So the next question is why we need to get the turbulence modeling accurate in urban wind flow analysis. So in this modern area, it's very common to see or implement building augmented wind turbine and photovoltaic modules in our urban region to produce renewable energy. To get the wind loading on these apparatus, we need to get the turbulence modeling accurate for this region. We also need to specify which type and which scale of these urban the wind turbine and the photovoltaic modules we can use in a specific building. So to specify those, we also need to resolve the turbulent flow. The other thing is the structural integrity of an isolated building or of any building. So we need to know how much wind load can a building withstand in an urban area. To do that, we need to get the pressure value on the wake region of a building. And if we cannot get the turbulence modeling accurate, if we cannot resolve the flow in around a building, we cannot get the pressure value accurate for that building. On top of that, we have also noticed that the pedestrian comfort level wind speed is also correlated to the turbulent intensity in the urban region. So we have already established that for urban area, it's very imperative to get the mean flow velocity correct and turbulence intensity correct. So how can we do that? So there are two methods. First of all, we can always use the direct measurement like cup, anemometer, LiDAR, SODAR methods, which physically measures the variable. But for urban wind flow projects, they don't have that fiscal resources to go through all these expensive and lengthy experiments. The other way around is we can use the CFD approaches previously mentioned like DNS, LES, and FANS. But since DNS and LES is more expensive, most of the time researchers tends to go through the RANS method. So in RANS-based turbulence model, we have some specific turbulence models, say K epsilon, K omega, K omega SST. So all these models are numerically very robust. They're computationally very cheap, and all of them are commercially available in all the CFD packages. But the issue with these trans-based turbulence model is they are very inaccurate for the wake and stagnation region of a bluff body, or you can say wake and stagnation region of a building. So we have identified that the inaccuracy comes in the form of a recirculation length, turbulent kinetic energy, and turbulent production. So these parameters, RANS-based turbulence model calculates them incorrectly. These two plots, I just wanted to show what sort of inaccuracy we have seen with the RANS-based turbulence model. So in figure 7, we are comparing the turbulent kinetic energy on the stagnation region, on the center line of the stagnation region actually. So we have compared the data for the K epsilon model with the experimental data. And as you can clearly see that the K epsilon model over predicts the turbulent kinetic energy quite significantly. Figure 8, which is my preliminary work, we can also, we compared the turbulence production term here, but on the wake region of a center line. And here also you can see that the K epsilon model is over predicting the turbulence production term quite significantly. So that we confirm from these two plots is that the RANS-based turbulence model is inaccurate for both stagnation and wake region of a bluff body. So now comes my research project. So the main objective of my research project is I want to analyze the wake region of a thin flat plate, because we have seen that the wake in the wake region RANS based turbulence model doesn't work accurately. So I want to analyze that, and I want to improve their accuracy. This is just a streamlined plot. So I'm mainly focusing on this area, and this is the plate I'm talking about. In terms of my research objectives, so I want to improve the RANS-based turbulence model by modifying their turbulence production term. So RANS-based turbulence model is always inexpensive, and if I can improve their accuracy, these would be very efficient in urban wind flow analysis. The next objective is I want to see what does my improved turbulence model do in calculating the recirculation length. Does it calculate it accurately or inaccurately? And the third objective I am interested in is the analyze the base pressure on the wake of the flat plate, so that we can get the accurate pressure loading or wind loading of that thin flat plate. So I'm just going to share some of my preliminary results. So the first term we analyzed is the turbulence production term. So turbulence production term is defined in this equation, and one of their parameter is the T, which is a time scale. For the K epsilon model or RANS-based turbulence model, they use the time scale as K over E, but Durbin, who is proposed a new time scale or new time limit, which is a function of mean flow strain rate. So we wanted to see what does this new time limit does in the wake region, or if it improves the production term in any way or not. So we started our analysis on the wake center line, because along the wake center line, only the mean flow strain rate is present, or S is present. So we wanted to see what's the effect of TD along the wake center line. And from figure 10, you can clearly see that we already seen that the K epsilon model over predicts this turbulence production term. But if we use the new time limit proposed by Durbin, which is TD with alpha equals to 1, you can see that our results more or less comparable with the DNS result, which is always accurate. After analyzing this time limit along the wake center line where mean flow strain rate is present, we wanted to see what does this TD does in the off center line where both mean flow strain and rotation rate is present. So this is the plot for a mean flow strain and rotation rate uh, where R over S, and you can see that both of them are more or less within the same scale. So we selected some line along the x-axis, like this axis along this line, and we wanted to test that TD along those axes. So figure 12 is showing us the comparison of the TD along the off center line. And from figure 12A, B, and C, you can clearly see that even with the presence of mean flow rotation rate, TD still predicts the turbulence production term accurately compared to the K epsilon model. So this confirms two things. First of all, this is a very novel result because this hasn't been done before in the wake region, and this also confirms that the Darwin's time limit TD, which is a function of S, doesn't depend on the relative magnitude of mean flow strain and rotation rate. In terms of future plans, so the next step for us is to perform an experiment for the wake of a normal flat plate and further validate our preliminary analysis and achieve above mentioned objectives. So for the experiment, we are going to use the particle image velocimetry method in a open wind tunnel to capture the velocity field. Figure 13 is showing us the schematic diagram of my experimental setup. So this is my wind tunnel. The flow is going to come in. We're going to mix this with a dye as a marker. This is our working section where we're going to put the plate with the camera, and we're going to capture the velocities field with the camera. And from the position of the marker, will then convert those into the velocity field, and we'll use the data for our future analysis. So conclusion. So main objective for this project is if we can improve the RAN space turbulence model, it would significantly make it more efficient because it's already cheap. This method can also be used in future building design. So you can estimate how your flow is gonna behave with a specific design of your building. And this improved turbulence model can be used in any other engineering application, which is a novel achievement from the fluid dynamics perspective. These are my references, and thank you everybody for coming here and listening to my topic. Thank you. I'm gonna stop share now.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ashker, for that interesting talk. Our next presenter is Harrison. Yeah, Harrison, and you want me to start the presentation on my end, right?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Just give me a minute to. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much.
No worries.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. What a wonderful first talk we've had. And so I'm happy to follow it up with some of my own research. So my research is called Imagining Literacy, Finding What's Real by Making Believe. And a couple housekeeping items just to get out of the way before we start. I share some student stories of experiences from my research over the course of this presentation. And I just wanted to reassure everyone that the names that they're addressed by are participant-chosen pseudonyms, and the pronouns in which they're addressed by are also participant-chosen to reflect the pronouns they most identify with. So with that set up ahead of time, we'll move on to our first slide here. which talks about an image that I'd like to share with you to get our conversation started today. So the image you're looking at was titled Literacy as Connection, and it was actually drawn by hand by one of the students in my master's study. She was struggling a bit to articulate what literacy meant to her, and she was talking to me that day about how she connects well to drawing and images. And so I encouraged her to take some time to sit down and actually draw out what she felt literacy was about and what it meant for her. And this was the image that she created. And that through line of connection was an essence or keyword that she attached to literacy for the remainder of the creative process. And so this type of image may not be what you immediately associate with literacy when you think about it as a word yourself, or as an academic who may think of literacy in a bit more of a reading, writing type of way. And so I just wanted to open the conversation with this as a framing piece to show you the kind of directions that students chose to take when they were discussing literacy with me in an artistic context. So if we move on now to actually ask the question of what is literacy in the theatrical space, that was kind of the framing of my own master's study. So the first question you're looking at, what is it like to experience literacy within a theatrical space, was my master's question. And what I was most curious with this question in my inquiry was, what is literacy looking like in an arts-based school? How are the arts impacting how students articulate what literacy means to them? And how are the arts potentially enriching literacy for those students at the same time? As I transition into my doctorate and as I enter the second year of my PhD, what I've become interested in is to now understand, now that I've kind of identified what those experiences can look like, how can drama actually be used to encourage complex literacy practices within secondary schools specifically? And so a lot of research in this area, particularly the connection of drama and literacy together, occur in primary schools, so in elementary settings. And so moving it into a secondary space and looking at it through that lens offers a bit of difference to what's already out there. When you think about literacy, it's possible to kind of split them into autonomous views of literacy or ideological views of literacy. And what I mean by that is an autonomous view of literacy thinks about it in a very skill-based sense. So a reading, writing, speaking, and listening sense. Whereas an ideological viewpoint would think about literacy as impacting your knowledge, identity, and being. So who you are as a person will impact how you become literate and the types of literacies you encounter in your life. Both are equally important. Reading, writing, speaking, and listening as skills are all essential in literacy teaching and learning. So I see them as existing in tandem with each other and in partnership with each other. But my research leans more towards the ideological literacy in the sense that that's what it's expanding upon. That's what I'm digging deeper into with the type of inquiry that I do. And so I think of literacy as a kind of social activity that has purpose. And I really deal with this idea of authenticity. I think that by inviting students into conversations around literacy through the arts, you can actually really increase the authenticity of their learning and how they engage with curriculum specifically. Because curriculum is often understood from a teacher's perspective, which is important, but we don't always ask what that means for our students and how it actually transitions into their learning and their own experiences. And so moving on, we ask, why drama? Isn't theater just about play? As a theater teacher, this is often a critique you get, both from other teachers and from parents at large. Drama is an electives course. It's not considered part of the core curriculum. And so sometimes questions arise around, well, why use drama to do this particular type of work? Research has shown that drama can be an aspirational pedagogy, meaning that it can enrich literacy approaches by engaging with them multimodally, which means it can engage with them through text in the form of scripts. It can embody literacy through characterization. And it can show literacy skills in how you design a set for a play or how you interact with different technical elements. Lighting and sound set mood and tone. And so there's many different ways of engaging with a text in a dramatic setting that expand it beyond the traditional sense. These complex literacy practices also have been shown to develop identity and creativity in students. And that's part of what my inquiry is hopefully going to deal with in more specific terms as well. What are the specific impacts of this identity development? How is creativity helping students better articulate literacy? And so some of those different literacy possibilities that literature has already started to explore is expanding beyond the reading and writing scope and into that seeing, feeling, moving, acting, and interacting piece. And so these are just some of the potential possibilities that expand outward from a view of literacy that is more embodied and alive. And so if we look at the methodology for my work, there's actually a subsection of phenomenology, a niche vein of it, if you will, called theatrical phenomenology. It's quite new. Johnston was the first one to officially coin it under this particular term in 2017. And why he did that was he was a phenomenological researcher, and he felt that drama was a way in which to engage in research very concretely. And so he's broke apart drama into three specific components that he thought all reflected well in a phenomenological tone. And so he actually separates drama, theater, and performance from each other. Drama, he says, is very specifically the study of dramatic texts, scripts, things like that. Theater is the process of taking that script or that written component and actually getting ready to turn it into a production. That's when you hire your actors, that's when you start doing rehearsals, that's when you plan lighting and sound effects, that's when you build your set, find your space. And then the actual performance piece is actually showing off that production to an invited audience. And importantly, Johnston said that to have true theatrical phenomenology, you have to have each of these components. So you have to start with a written text, you have to actually create something around that text, and then you have to share that text publicly to an audience, because the audience engagement piece in that performance is really important to understanding the full, well-rounded nature of the experience. If you want to think about these terms in relation to thespians or people who work in the theater that are really well known, Stanislavski is a really famous thespian who designed the method of physical actions, which is all about understanding how to create a character through the really intricate study of a text or a script, how to pull out author's intention or playwright's intention, how to embody that to reflect your own life, how to act it out verbally and non-verbally, all of that. Our TROD, Theater of Anxiety, is all about non-verbal communication strategies. So if you happen to have a script or a character that's non-verbal, or you want to communicate mood and intention through sound or music, as an example, you would deal with our TROD's work. And then Brecht is really well known for what's called epic theater, which is all about engaging your audience in a dialogue following your performance. So rather than just performing at an audience and then letting that audience leave the theater and not engaging with them, Brecht actually said it was super important to engage your audience in an ongoing conversation about what they witnessed and how it impacted not only the actors and the performers in the actual piece, but the audience as observers. And so one of the stories I'd like to share with you from one of the students in my study, to give you a bit more of a concrete example of what actually happened in my work, was Petra. And Petra was really unique in that I call her my dancing storyteller, because what began as a very traditional semi-structured interview of sitting around a table and asking questions quickly turned into an improvisation dance piece. And so Petra was a bit uncomfortable responding to interview questions in a conversation, a traditional conversational sense. And so I asked her and encouraged her, well, how would you rather engage with this type of content? And so she proposed dancing, because dancing was something that she enjoyed to do. She was a competitive dancer. She felt very comfortable in that environment. And so we actually pushed the interview table to the side of the room, and very well on her part and quite awkwardly on my part, started dancing around this space in the school's administrative office. And through that dancing and that movement, she was better able to tell me that she felt that to tell a story, you should have to use every part of your body. And so this through line of dance, this understanding through movement, became central to her work as she progressed through the study as a whole, which was really exciting, because I wouldn't have gone into that interview knowing that that was how she would articulate literacy specifically. And she's one of 8 unique examples of how each of them took up that call a little bit differently. And so just to know what the research actually looks like from a process perspective, if you want a timeline to follow, the research took place in my master's over 4 months, and each of those months had a very particular type of data collection. And so in September, when the school year first started, I spent a couple weeks getting to know the students and the teachers, and then I invited the students who chose to participate to do 20 to 45-minute semi-structured interviews. Now, in Petra's case, that meant a 20-minute dance session, and in Claire's case, another of the students, who I'll talk about in just a moment, that actually meant some singing. And so interviews is a loose term in this sense, because they got to kind of choose the modality and way that they engaged with the questions that I gave them. to try and encourage them to keep engaging with those questions over a sustained period of time, as opposed to strictly a one-off interview or one-off engagement. I had them go through a process of journaling over the month of October, where they took pictures with cameras. They drew pictures from scratch, as you saw at the beginning of the presentation. Some of them chose to write poetry around the questions. Some of them chose to write scripts, and others did very traditional written responses, so reflective written responses. And so they kept those questions in their mind. They kept thinking about them. I kept going back to them and having conversations with them, just to make sure that when we actually got to the next step, the character creation step, that we were really being authentic to what they believed. And so when they actually created characters in November, they got to think about all of that past data, all of that interview data, all of that journaling data, and then they actually embodied their feelings around literacy into characters, scripts, songs, and dances. And then in December, right before the school semester ended for Christmas, they actually got to perform all of their characters for an audience that they had complete control over inviting. So they invited parents and teachers, fellow students, and they were kind enough to invite my examination committee that actually got to come and sit and watch all of the performances as they happened live. And so this is all about making literacy as more about action. It's all about getting it off the page. And what I think was really beneficial with that was that students were building agency, authorship, and identity by doing that. They were the ones guiding the conversation. They were the voice that was most explicit and direct in the conversations that emerged out of the work. And as Gallagher says, they moved into the life and the activity of the literacy rather than a components and mechanisms approach. This research wasn't super concerned with assessment specifically. It was more concerned with the actual lived experience of going through that learning process. And so another possible nuance in the doctoral work that I may consider is moving a little bit into that components piece, understanding assessment in relation to these experiences, now that I've taken the time to understand these experiences really concretely by themselves. But getting it off the page was super important to me and the students as we went through the process. And so another example of a student in the study is my singing writer. And so I mentioned Claire a little bit earlier, a couple slides ago, and she was really unique in the fact that she told a story in the interview about this little button, because her English language arts teacher the year before brought this big jar of buttons into the classroom and had each student pick one. And then whatever button you picked, you had to write a whole story around it. You created a whole universe around this little button. And Claire did really well at that assignment. She created a character that was really ambitious. She created a character that embodied a lot of her own personality traits, and she got really good feedback on her writing. And so when she was talking about literacy in the interview, and as we moved into journaling, she attached those character traits from that successful character assignment to how she actually articulated literacy. So she was attributing her past success into her current understanding. But to make it a little bit more about herself, because she herself is a musician, she actually transitioned a lot of her thoughts into music. And she played a song live in front of an audience of just about over 60 people on her ukulele, all about ambition and how being ambitious is something you have to, as a trait you have to have while you're trying to become literate or learn language arts, learn other languages, things like that. And so she sang live on stage all of those thoughts and feelings out. And she said she wouldn't have felt immediately comfortable doing that in a very traditional language arts sense because they hadn't done that type of thing before. So the fact that she was able to actually perform it out this way differently than she had in the past really helped her thinking further develop. And so these songs and dance are not the only ways that students took up the work. Some students went very traditional monologue, which was still great. They gave wonderful performances, but they had a performance where they would stand on stage and deliver a speech to the audience with a lot of emotion and intention behind that, but some chose to focus just on that. Some chose to actually do 3D projection models, and so they actually had images projected on the walls behind them that would interact with them while they were going through their performance. Petra, as I said, did dance choreography and even did some live painting on stage. She got a giant canvas out and actually painted her own face on the canvas in between her dance beats, because for her, literacy was all about unveiling her own identity and her own thought process. Claire had her original song composition. Amelia did a shadow tableau show where she actually had a sheet pulled down in front of her and she backlit it so that all the shadows were cast along the sheet. And then she told the story through almost a shadow puppet show. And then Samuel, who I'll talk a bit more about in the next couple slides here, actually did a full ventriloquism show. He actually taught himself how to construct a little paper puppet and how to actually do ventriloquism, where it sounds like you're talking through the puppet to actually articulate his understanding. So there was a wide range of performances that chose to take up the question differently. And so Samuel, I call him my shy puppeteer, because his performance was all about hope. And it was about, the character he created was an older gentleman who worked at a library and would share stories with the children who went there. He had similar encounters with a volunteer at a library himself. And so he was kind of embodying that sense of character that he got from his real life here. But why it ultimately shifted to being about hope as a central metaphor is that not too long before the performance, the puppet was actually stolen from him on his way to school, and it got ripped into all these pieces and destroyed. And he was quite devastated by this. And at the time, I thought that I would have to do damage control and kind of reevaluate what the performance would look like. But I walked into the rehearsal hall that day, and I saw all 8 of the students sitting around in this tight little circle, gluing this poor puppet back together again from scratch so that Samuel could have this puppet to perform with. And while it looked a teensy bit mangled, he sure still loved it. And he still was able to perform with this puppet and do this ventriloquism show. And one of the lines, or one of the things he told me that I put just at the end of this paragraph here, was that Tick, which was the name of the puppet, brought everyone together. And so it was a really hopeful, uplifting thing for him. And one of the things he spoke in the post-performance reflections about was how learning about literacy in this way and being part of this project really helped him to make friends, which was something that was a definitely added benefit to the work beyond the specific question around literacies. So why are multimodal literacies important? Well, I think, like I said before, moving them off the page and turning them into an actual literacy event is something that can be really powerful. I think that we can better develop students' emotional and personal connections to content by doing this kind of work. I think it's a lot more exciting for the students, and I think research can show that it can increase critical thinking and engagement with students as opposed to strictly traditional ways of teaching this content. And teachers who've done the work in the past have actually said that it's helped to create more holistic and social experiences in their classrooms. So they're seeing real concrete benefits to this type of work when they do it in their own classroom settings. For me, I think that critical thinking piece is especially important now in our current climate. And I think this is a way to really teach those skills in addition to other things in a way that students can really engage with. And I think one last thing to mention here is inviting students into curriculum conversations. I think that too often we talk about curriculum as teachers, and while we're certainly thinking of our students and ways to differentiate that curriculum for them, we're not always inviting students themselves into those conversations. And I think that if we did that, we can increase the authenticity and engagement of the participatory practices we do in our schools. And I think that students are better able to articulate how something will connect to their everyday life than we could hypothesize as their teachers. And so I think inviting them into these conversations is a super important piece of the type of work that I do. Den Hare, who's out of the U of A, actually taught me curriculum when I was a pre-service teacher. And so I do also find it nice and funny that I am referencing him and getting more into his work the more I go into research, which has been nice. And so that's my work in a nutshell. I just have a couple of quick acknowledgements that I wanted to do before I close off here. I'm acknowledging both my master's and my doctoral supervisors because the work is essentially continuing out of my master's. Dr. Gabriela Alonso Yanez and Dr. Joe Towers were supervisors in my master's work. They were extremely encouraging and actually are the ones who pushed me into drama as a methodology. And Dr. Catherine Burwell, my current doctoral supervisor, is simply fantastic. She was a member of my master's committee and she's fully embraced this work and has been incredibly supportive. And so I couldn't imagine my program without any of these wonderful scholars. And so I take the time to thank each of them, as well as the Workland School of Education for the incredible funding opportunities they've given to this work. Most recently, the doctoral scholarship, which is from the Workland family, which has been incredibly supportive for me. If you want to contact me for anything, if you want copies of these slides, I saw a question earlier before we got started if slides will be provided. Feel free to shoot me an email. I'm happy to send them off to you and happy to talk about this at any time. I look forward to the questions that are going to come up, and thank you so much for coming today.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much, Harrison and Ashker, for these talks. And yeah, so yeah, as you mentioned, we had a few questions, and just to answer the question on sharing slides, yeah, this presentation will be uploaded on YouTube, so you can view it there. But if you really want the presentation right away, then you can contact the presenters directly and ask them for their slides. Yeah, let's go into the questions now. And I think first question is we can take from Dennis, which is for Ashker. How much, Ashker, can you see the question?
Yes.
Yeah, so go ahead, unmute yourself and just.
Okay. Oh, thanks a lot, Dennis, for the question. So the question is, how much computer time is involved for DNS, for RANs, and which computers do you use? To answer that question, it always depends on the flow domain, how complex it is, and what are the variables you are trying to solve. For example, I can give you one example for DNS is that suppose I have a 25-meter by 16-meter flow domain with just one single flow, single flat plate in that one. That's pretty simple flow domain. So for DNS, I guess that takes around 1 week of computing power. I cannot comment on the RANS modeling because I haven't done any RANS modeling myself. So I cannot comment on the how much computing power it needs for RANS modeling. I am assuming considerably less given the modeling itself. And the other question is, what type of computers do I use? It's just a regular computer I use. It's just with more RAM, more computing power. So for example, the computer I used, the RAM I have is 64 gigs, and the CPU I use, I forgot, it's Core i8 or something like that. But nowadays, it's not very important for you to have a very high-end computer yourself, because um, one example I can give you is that Amazon Web Service, what that does is they will rent you computing power. So what you just have to do is you just have to upload your code, and they will run it for you and give you back the results. You just have to rent the computing power for themselves. So it's not necessary for you to have a very high-end computer for yourself.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ashker. And two questions for Harrison.
Yes, thank you. I was just taking the time to read them. So the first question about the interview style sounds very collaborative. How have you communicated the findings with participants? So there was an ongoing process of member checking with participants. So as I collected data like interview data and journal data, I was constantly bringing it back to them and getting their feedback on it. That did add time to the analysis process because you had to keep having this ongoing conversation. And then following the actual performances, when the data was formally written into a thesis, I did continue to touch base both with student participants and with participants' families who were interested in the data that was coming out, and they were asking questions at the performance evening and things like that. And so there were ongoing discussions around that while writing. And then each of the families had a chance in the consent form to ask if they wanted a copy of the work when it was finished, so a copy of the approved thesis that would go into the vault. And all of them actually said yes. And so all of them actually did get an email from me at the end when it was approved and in the vault with a copy of it for themselves and the opportunity to ask any questions or feedback at that point too. So that was kind of how the discussion kept going past the initial collection point. Another question I see is, how do you view numeracy with respect to literacy? I really love this question. Dwayne, one of the students in my study, he didn't have a specific slide talking about him in this presentation, but he talked about math as a language. And so he actually had a journal entry that had different mathematical equations that he was going through in his mathematics class, and he was discussing how he had a hard time understanding them, but by understanding what the different signs meant in all the equations and talking to his math teacher, he was developing language skills around how to actually solve these problems. That would probably be the most specific mention from a student in relation to numeracy or mathematics. And in my writing, more broadly myself, I talked about literacy and numeracy in relation to policy documents together, because they often are put together in Alberta education policy documents or policy drafts. But in the future PhD work that I'm undertaking, numeracy will also be something in the back of my mind that if it comes up, I'll explore more fully.
Perfect. Thank you very much for answering those questions. And again, both the presentations are outside my area of research, but I also have a generic question for Ashker, because engineering is far, far away from me. So Ashker, what do you think? What's the real life implication of your research? What would it change in real life setting, like that's outside the research environment?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because we always have to connect our result with what's happening in the real world. Like I mentioned, so suppose in nowadays, if you are planning a city or if you are planning an urban area, nowadays there is no accurate way to predict how your design or structural design um, is gonna correlate with your wind flow, how it's gonna affect the wind flow in that area, how the pedestrian is gonna affect it for that structural design. So if we get the turbulence model correct for that urban region, and if we can simulate that ahead of the designing phase, then it would be very great for the designing team to tweak the structural component, so that the wind flow design is very comfortable for the pedestrian, as well as the structural loading on the structures, or wind loading on the structures is very accurate.
Wow, fascinating. Yeah, a lot of time we just see structures, we don't know how much work goes behind the scene. Yeah, and I have a question for Harrison as well. Has your own personal understanding of literacy changed because of your research? And how did you take that change? What exactly changed, and how did you deal with that feeling?
So thanks for that question. I think the biggest thing that changed for me, because I was a language arts teacher, was just being sure that in the future, if I'm planning lessons or designing curriculum, to include elements of this type of work, so include elements of drama within the language arts lessons themselves. There is space within the curriculum to allow those type of cross-subject connections. I also noticed a question that came up around practicality in the Q&A box, which I think this also relates to. So I think the impact on classrooms is kind of twofold. I wanted to show in the work that it's not as labor intensive to do drama in the classroom as you may assume it is. So there are ways to integrate it really nicely without having to be super resource intensive, because schools are working on tight budgets and tight constraints. And I wanted to show ways that you could think about language arts differently. And so the language arts curriculum itself is such a large document. There's so many learner outcomes, but there's ways to address multiple outcomes at the same time while working through a lens of drama and the fine arts. And so by kind of incorporating these activities, you're better able to meet those curriculum outcomes, you're able to cover more of your curriculum and think about your curriculum a little differently. So, and that's kind of what I walked away from as a teacher as well, thinking differently, being more critical.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And I think just those are the questions that we had. And we are, anyways, we are just close to the time, and we also have to just conclude. So I will proceed with the concluding remarks. So what did we learn today through this lunch and learn session? From Harrison's presentation, we learned that by combining phenomenological research methods with the framework of drama, a multimodal, contextually responsive, and linguistically diverse literacy environment can be created. From Ashker's presentation, we learned that quantitative research is needed to improve the numerical models for predicting turbulent characteristics in the stagnation and leeward region of a building, and in order to better understand flow dynamics. I think we already achieved the goal of this lunch and learn session today. Don't forget to connect with us on the social media. If you're on Twitter, then at the Grad College, you can follow us there. Also, you can check our website, ucalgary.ca slash Grad College. Yeah, and that's it from us. So we'll looking forward to seeing you in our next lunch and learn session. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.